Finally, game week. Mark Rogers, TV, the voice of college football, talking up the Ohio State Buckeyes each and every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern time. And I can only do it bringing on our distinguished panel, which includes right now Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts and, of course, Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove. Boys, how you doing tonight?
Doing good.
Doing great.
So, guys, imagine a week from tonight, we'll actually have action on the field that we could watch and analyze and enjoy and then discuss, as opposed to what do we dredge up to talk about for the next 9 or 10 months in preparation for Ohio State football. I know it's only FAU, but it's at least live bullets for Justin Fields and company coming up this week. So, Steve, for you, this is just another Ohio State opener going all the way back to the early 80s. And I know we've discussed your fandom, then being a student, then being an Ohio State beat writer. And, this has to bring back memories when you go to Ohio Stadium, especially for that opening weekend, that opening game, and just another season of Ohio State football.
Yeah, Mark, it does. And I think that as we welcome our esteemed colleague, Tony Gerdeman, to the show tonight. Tony, how are you?
Doing very well. Thank you, Steve, for asking.
Okay.
I was just going to ignore him, Steve, but if you
I don't
want,
care how Gerd's doing.
Well, this is what I say is there's always anticipation this time of year because it's been 8 full months since the team last played in the bowl game. But this year, in particular, you have a new coach with Ryan Day, new full-time head coach, even though he did the first 3 games last year as the acting coach, a new quarterback with Justin Fields, presumably a different way to attack opponents offensively and a different way to play defense with Jeff Hafley and Greg Madison taking over as the coordinators there. And you want to see if the improvement on defense is going to be tangible. So to me, there is a lot of excitement, a lot of storylines going into what would otherwise be kind of a mundane type game. At least in weeks 2 and 4, they're going to play in-state opponents with Cincinnati and Miami of Ohio, where there could be some interesting things going on with that, and neighbors and family members, clashing. There's no set storyline with Florida Atlantic other than they've been an FBS team for the last 15 years or however many years it's been, and that Lane Kiffin is their head coach. I was told something today that's kind of interesting, that he has a house that overlooks, I want to say, the ocean there in Boca Raton, and he made a deal with our good friend Pat Chun, who used to be the athletic director there years ago and is now at Washington State, that if he stayed 4 years, he'd get to keep the house. So I hadn't heard that, but that's kind of one of the side plots of Lane Kiffin entering his 3rd season as the head coach at Florida Atlantic. And I looked this up. It was kind of weird to me. I had forgotten he was the head coach of the Oakland Raiders of the NFL before he ever got the job as the head coach of the Tennessee Volunteers. And then he left Tennessee after just 1 season to go to USC, where they were on probation, no bowl game the first 2 years he was there. And then in the middle of his 2nd year off probation, they fired him in the middle of his 2nd year off probation. I don't know if it's a checkered past for this guy or what it is, but he is one of the colorful figures out there in college football, no doubt about it.
Exactly, Steve. There was a point in Lane Kiffin's career, I think he was like 32 years old, and he had already been the coach, or maybe 36, whatever he was. He was in his early 30s. He had already been the coach at USC, Tennessee, and the Oakland Raiders. And I'm thinking, what has this guy done? What has he accomplished that he's had 2 major football powers on the collegiate level and coached an NFL team other than being the son of Monty Kiffin? I guess that finishes my answer right there. Tony.
I think he's going to have a second act like Nick Saban that's just going to be like when he gets into his 50s, he's just going to win one championship after another. That's like 10 years down the road, though.
I see him living like at a cabana in his 50s and just living on the beach and going to a tiki hut and drinking every day.
Yeah, that could be too.
We should all be so lucky.
Yeah. Don't hate, appreciate.
There
Kevin,
you go.
when you think of Ohio State openers, how long have you been around to enjoy Buckeyes football from game one, and what comes to mind?
My first year was the 89 season. That's when I was a freshman at Ohio State. And then when I got out of school, I went and worked for one of the local TV stations, and I went away for a little while. But, my story is a little different because I grew up on the West Coast, and it wasn't necessarily an opening game, but there was the Ohio State USC series that was going on, and I actually grew up as an SC fan. So I was a little conflicted at that point, and I was definitely there for the Cooper game with the John Cooper game with the rain and the lightning, and they called it, and that was not a great scene for a bunch of drunk frat boys sitting up in 5C who wanted to see the completion of the game. But as for this game, yeah, it is devoid of a lot of great storylines per se. When it's not a big opponent. I mean, it's not a historical rival. It's not even. There's no real tie there other than the thing I'll think of most when I see Lane Kiffin lead that team out is thank you in 2014 when you were the OC at Alabama for not running the ball anymore, when you were having great success picking up huge chunks of yardage, and then you decided to abandon the run altogether, and Ohio State ended up coming out with the win there.
Kevin, yes, I bring that up all the time when talking about that game. Derrick Henry was on a roll on a given series there in the second half. They pound ahead with him. Then they suddenly forgot that he was on the field. When I think about openers and specifically head coaching debuts, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking Urban Meyer against Miami of Ohio. Devin Smith made a one-handed catch that was ridiculous in game one. They won like 56-10. You had Jim Tressel against Akron, game one. You had John Cooper against Syracuse, played a pretty good Syracuse team in game one. Then they got routed the next week at Pitt. They got just completely annihilated, like 42-10. Then they came back for the LSU game that they pulled out in miraculous fashion. Earl Bruce's first game, I believe, was against Syracuse as well, if I remember correctly, in 1979. Claire joins the party. Claire, how you doing today?
I'm doing so well. I saw Kevin's note and thought that was you. So I'm a little late to the party, but I'm here nonetheless, donning scarlet and gray, ready to talk Buckeye football.
Claire, it's opening day.
I can't wait. I'm going to be there.
So your thoughts about what's different about opening day? And again, new quarterback, new coach. This only happens every 7 to 10 to 15 years at Ohio State football.
Hopefully, we're not going to cycle them through like Michigan. I have mixed emotions about it because I still have mixed emotions about it because opening day is always special. When you have 100,000 plus fans turn up for a spring game, it doesn't take anything away from that opener, but you just know how Buckeye fans show up. It's a little different atmosphere. All the students aren't quite out yet. It's not usually a rowdy crowd. It's usually a game where they're going to easily cover the spread. And I don't think that's going to be terribly different this time. I definitely have some thoughts about how, Florida Atlantic can challenge Ohio State and where they may try to trip Ohio State up. But, the difference between, this Lane Kiffin and Tennessee Lane Kiffin or USC Lane Kiffin is that if he loses this game, they'll still let him back on the bus.
Claire, did you sneak in a betting tip there? They're going to cover the line for sure?
She started with one and she ended with one. That was pretty good.
Okay. I'll have to consider that as part of my predictions, man, and I'll credit you if Ohio State's definitely going to cover this one. Okay.
No, I think they're going to have no problem covering this week. I think the only thing that trips them up is if they somehow have not, if the Buckeye defense is not shored up whatever gaps they've had in the run defense, that's really going to be, I think, the only thing that ends up being the real kind of a bugaboo between them and covering the spread.
I'm looking at 28 points here.
27 or something, yeah.
Florida Atlantic is 0-4 against the spread in their last 4 non-con games.
This is always my theory to stay away from these kind of games because, number one, you don't know who's going to be on the field in the fourth quarter. You don't know how hard they're going to be playing. You don't know how the coach is going to call the game. You don't know if they're going to put down the throttle or they're going to ease off. You just don't know what's going to happen.
So I think
Tony, you
they're
haven't
gonna come
talked for a while. You're probably wondering why you even showed up tonight. What
I'm
are
just
your
watching.
thoughts on this thing?
I would say Florida Atlantic might be without their top punter. So I would definitely take the Buckeyes, lay the points. Although keep in mind, they do have an Australian backup punter. And as we all know here, Australian punters are the best punters. So maybe that's still an advantage for Florida Atlantic. When we talk about openers or what we're looking forward to seeing, I thought it was interesting. Ryan Day really seemed excited about seeing his defense this week. I asked him about his concerns, and he said blocking and tackling, or ball protection and tackling especially. But they've worked on tackling, and he's eager to see them out there and make sure that they have completed all of the work that they've done, that it pays off in the game. And I asked him, were you good? Did you do well tackling in camp? And he said, we'll see on Saturday. So even though things went well in camp and they were forcing turnovers and he saw an aggressive defense that he liked, you still don't know until Saturday. And even then, it's just Florida Atlantic. And then you also have to keep in mind, you probably won't have the Ohio State defense showing everything that they need to show because they have Cincinnati the next week, whereas Cincinnati's going to have to show more than Ohio State will. So that'll be an advantage for the Buckeyes, even though Cincinnati has a couple extra days to prepare. Not to move too far ahead.
Every Wednesday night at 9:00 Eastern time. And of course, we've got this distinguished bunch to talk FAU and Lane Kiffin, who, by the way, I just looked it up. I was correct. 32 years old when he became head coach of the Oakland Raiders.
That's
unfathomable.
Crazy.
And it's still more less ridiculous than John Gruden being there now.
I was going to say, how old is Sean McVay? Like 13? I mean,
so let's also keep in mind when we disregard FAU, I'm thinking back to a Navy game early in the season, like 31-26. Who was that had to pick off the 2-point conversion
Brian
in
Roll.
the end? Yes, Brian Roll. I'm thinking back to a Bowling Green game, a couple different Bowling Green games, and Northern Illinois in 2015. Darren Lee had to grab a pick six, and a lot of non-conference games have against Group of 5 teams have been a bit tricky for the Buckeyes, as they have for everyone when you take like a 40-year history. But so it is possible that the game could be competitive for a while.
but I mean, you look at the service academies, and those games are always traps. I mean, when you look at it, and with them running triple option and things along those lines, running a system that you don't prepare against, and I mean, and of course, you're going to be going against teams that are well disciplined, obviously, by being the service academies. You talk about maybe about like a Bowling Green. I mean, that's you bring in the in-state battle. Players that were lightly recruited or not recruited by Ohio State at all. So, I mean, there certainly is some merit at those points. But, yeah, you never want to look past any game. But, I mean, a non-conference game, you just don't know. I mean, I have to agree with Claire that this one feels like a pretty easy cover for Ohio State. I mean, I know the line's somewhere in the mid-20s, not quite to 4 touchdowns. But, I mean, I like Ohio State to be able to go out there. They definitely have something to prove on both sides of the ball, that the defense last year was an anomaly and that the offense this year is not going to be a shadow of its former self, just, with Dwayne Haskins and the 3 receivers no longer on the team.
Unless you guys come up with a better angle, I want to go through each one of you. I'll start with Tony here in regards to a checklist of what you need to see on Saturday.
Well, I'll need to see Justin Fields healthy in the fourth quarter. That would be key. But I want to see the Ohio State running game run like they did in 2017, and completely opposite of how they did last year. You'll get Justin Fields back involved, and basically the offensive line just setting the tone, imposing their will, and getting back to being kind of the badasses that they're supposed to be, that they weren't last year. And I'm really high on this group of offensive linemen in their ability to do just that. And then again, on defense, just be solid and consistent. Let's not see 31 points to Oregon State or a 93-yard touchdown to a random running back. And just you don't have to be the silver bullets right away, because it's going to be the first game and Florida Atlantic's going to have some things for you that you've never seen before. But just look very good, look competent, look as good as, a Clemson or an Alabama in an opener that you're favored by 4 touchdowns in. You're supposed to win this by a lot, look good doing it, and stay healthy at quarterback.
Steve, anything in particular that you'd like to see?
Well, I think a lot of it's going to be on Justin Fields. I think we don't know publicly what he is capable of doing. We've seen little drips and drabs from mop-up action against Georgia and kind of an underwhelming performance in Ohio State's spring game. But again, there's so much more to his game probably than anybody has seen yet. And so to me, he needs to come out and be sharp and show that he's got command of the offense and can be a leader. And those are all things I think that are very important with this game, just for him. A lot of pressure on him. When you think about Ohio State's ranked 5th in the preseason poll, that's on the cusp of the playoff, picked at least via the AP polls, the top team in the Big Ten. You don't just show up in the middle of October and play to that level. You have to start out playing at that level in late August and September to be able to maintain that level throughout the season. So to me, I think people want to see, is this guy all he's cracked up to be? So I hate to put it all entirely on him, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of eyes on every move he makes and everything he does and every body language and every, you should have done this or whatever. People are going to be critiquing every move he makes because there's tougher games coming down the pipe. Cincinnati next week, at Indiana the following week. And I think to me, I agree with everything Tony said. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that you're looking for this week because it's a brand new team making their first appearance. But at the same time, I look at it and I just think that this season is pinned on Fields in so many ways.
Kevin, can you add anything? I know when you bat cleanup, it's difficult to come up with anything else.
Well, I'll say that I'm going to agree with everything that's been said before me, and
too much agreement here. We need a good game. We need like a Nebraska week, I guess.
Right. I think that I'm really interested in seeing what the secondary is going to do. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about Damon Arnett really having a bounce back. Jeff Hafley's had a lot of good things to say about him. I know that fans last year certainly didn't have a lot of good things to say there, but I want to see how he looks. I want to see if Jeffrey Okudah looks like a projected first-round NFL draft type of guy. I want to see what this bullet position is going to be all about. We may not get to see everything there just based on what FAU's composition is and what they do well. I mean, they were a running team last year. I mean, their best offensive player is a tight end. We may see a little bit more Pete Werner out there just based on who's going to be out there. But I want to see what defensively, what the structure is and how things may look a little bit different. And I certainly don't want to see the linebackers playing up the line of scrimmage.
I always enjoyed the contribution of Justin Wright. He's watched us on a regular basis and comments. I'm just wanting to know a little bit more because Claire, he believes that the FAU has some kind of chance in this game, but for some reason, pace of play is going to be a factor in this one.
So, I have a list of things that I would like to see, but, of course, we talked about it a couple weeks ago as far as the pace of the game. I think the one thing that the coaches have mentioned that the Ohio State defense is really focusing on this year is turnovers. And last year, Florida Atlantic was not a great team. They were in the wrong side of the column on turnovers. And if we know anything about just the kind of feel behind a game and the literal statistics behind the team that wins the turnover battle. If Ohio State can win the turnover battle, I think it does a lot to boost the confidence of a team. And then it really just demeans an offense that's really just turning over the ball often. So that's one thing I'd like to see is the Ohio State defense, win the turnover battle. And I think discipline comes along with that. How aggressive the Ohio State defense is going to be is going to depend on how much trickeration I think Florida Atlantic is going to throw at that Ohio State defense. And I think, honestly, there'll probably be quite a bit to start with. I think not, crazy trick plays, and it might be, but lots of quick hits and, screens and kind of spreading the field out to really see how disciplined this Ohio State defense can be and maybe make some room for an offense. But pace of the game, I think that's really going to be dependent on how balanced the offense is and how much Justin Fields is actually having to take the ball into his own hands, how many broken plays there are. If it doesn't have to be a high a tempo offense, then I don't see why they would. But Ohio State is always going to win a pace game on a team that they have they're outmatching someone else's depth. So Ohio State definitely has more depth than Florida Atlantic.
And Tony, I think there's something that I would like to see that you talked to on a number of occasions during the offseason, and that's the running back distribution behind JK, and then also how they're used, the amount and how they're used.
Well, we know DeMario right now is the number 2, or he was the last time we talked to anybody about the running backs. So, but he's also going to be used in the passing game because there are plans for him there, as we saw in the Michigan game last year with the wheel route against Devin Bush, and that will be there quite a bit, I would think, this year. So they'll do some of that. Behind him, freshman Marcus Crowley. I don't know that they'll need maybe 17 carries from JK today or this week, and then you go, does DeMario get 10? Does Marcus Crowley get 8? And I don't know if Master Teague is ready yet, but Steel Chambers, the other freshman, is there. And these are the games that you play those guys. And then you stop them at 3 games and see where you need them later on. But, yeah, I think there's going to be carries to go around this week. And now that DeMario McCall has been healthy and has been able to show himself that he can handle the pass blocking and things of that nature, and he's protected the football, that's one guy we haven't really talked about because he's been injured so much. He's a guy you talk about in the offseason as to what he could do in this offense if he's healthy. But now that he's healthy, we haven't been talking about him enough because there's so many other things going on. But he's definitely a guy that there's a role in this offense, and he's one of the most explosive players in the Big Ten. And now he's got all kinds of talent around him, and he's a guy that can make Justin Fields better too, just by wherever he is in the backfield or wherever. He's another skill position, another skill guy. And as Urban Meyer used to say, the quarterback is a product of those guys around him, and DeMario McCall could be a good one.
Claire, when you show up, Steve has to take a back seat to you in regards to the number of fans in the live chat. It's usually Steve takes precedence, but then you show up and you knock Steve to second place, and then there's the rest of us.
Although the it looks like DeAndre on the screen right now says the real OSU is in Stillwater, Oklahoma. He has my same last name, so I just on principle I can't agree with him, but we're gonna assume since he's a Crawford, he's a fan.
DeAndre gets a bit of a pass here because he watches on a regular basis, contributes, and does all those good things and talks it up. But he's a big ACC guy, as you can see. Trevor Lawrence is his guy in Clemson football. Yeah. So when this is a bit off topic in regards to Ohio State football, but again, I can't imagine that this won't be in the bag sometime in the third quarter, if not sooner. And I'm really going to have to weigh back and forth on this 28-point spread. But when I look at the Big Ten and I look at the non-conference games that really could make a statement for this conference, they're lacking. The games aren't there. Northwestern's got a game against Stanford, but we don't expect Northwestern to be vying for a college football playoff appearance. So, yeah, it would be great for the Big Ten for Northwestern to go out to Stanford and win a game. And Michigan's got a late season date with Notre Dame coming in. Other than that, there's not a whole lot for the Big Ten to lay claim to in regards to big wins against the other conferences. Nebraska's playing Colorado. That's their big game. Penn State's playing Pitt. Maryland's playing Syracuse, but again, Maryland's not going to be a factor. Michigan State's playing Arizona State. There's a lot of those mid-level Arizona State, Iowa State type teams. Iowa State may after Notre Dame, be the second best team that the Big Ten is playing in the non-conference. Kevin, I don't know if you've checked out some of these matchups.
Yeah, but if you really believe that the Big Ten is the deepest conference out there in terms of having 5 teams in the West that could be in competition and 4 teams in the East and whatnot, I mean, we've seen conferences say, well, we don't need to really play a lot outside because our conference is such a gauntlet. So yeah, I think that the goal would be to see some better non-conference games. I mean, with Ohio State not having a Power 5 opponent this year because of the TCU deal from last year, I mean, that certainly helps on the resume for the conference as a whole. Jim Delaney put in the rules a couple years ago when we went to 9 league games, no FCS opponents, even though some still managed to end up on the schedule here and there. But it's if you really believe that the Big Ten is going to be as deep and as much of a grinder as it is, I don't know if there's a huge upside to sit there when you're dealing with a 9-conference game schedule as it is, and you could play 5 road games in league play. You need to make sure you have that home date. Unless you have a great scheduler, I mean, you could sit there and not have enough home games to be able to pay all the bills.
But see, I'm going to play role of Big Ten hater here and say if Nebraska's beating Colorado and Ohio State's beating Cincinnati and Penn State over Pitt, and those are your best games, and maybe Michigan loses to Notre Dame, maybe they win, but it's only one game. Regardless of what happens in the conference, once the conference is playing in a silo, any conference, it's kind of difficult to be able to evaluate how good the conference is because every game's won and it's lost. Every league plays a 500 schedule inside the conference. So the way to measure these teams is how are they doing against each other outside the conference. So Steve, we talk about this all the time in regards to Big Ten play, and obviously the league having been left out of the championship for 2 consecutive years, it's going to be difficult for the Big Ten to lay claim to anything outside the conference as being valuable.
Well, we say that today as we sit here on August the 28th. I mean, nobody in the Big Ten is playing Alabama, Clemson, or Oklahoma, who are considered, or Georgia, who are considered to be 4 of the top 5 teams in the country. But what's to say Arizona State, who Michigan State plays, could win 8 or 9 games? What's to say that Notre Dame, who Michigan plays, could win 8 or 9 or 10 games? They were in the playoff last year. What's to say Cincinnati can't win 11 games like they did last year, who Ohio State's playing? So I hear what you're saying, and I do. I think Wisconsin in particular is guilty of this. In a lot of cases, they don't play a lot of major Power 5 conference, out-of-conference opponents over the years. But Northwestern playing Stanford definitely counts. I think Iowa playing Iowa State, a ranked team from the Big 12, counts. I think Purdue playing TCU, even though TCU is not ranked in the preseason, they've been a pretty good program over the last few years. So all they're guilty of is not playing Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, or Oklahoma. Beyond that,
Am I making any sense, Tony? Basically, what I'm saying is, unless there's a team in the Big Ten, and it's most likely Ohio State or the Ohio State-Michigan winner, unless Nebraska really surprises us, that shows that, okay, we're an 11-1 team, and we didn't have an embarrassing loss, and we dominated our conference. Therefore, we're a college football playoff team, and then we win in Indianapolis. Other than that, if it's a bit of a muddled situation, there aren't those games to point to like there have been in the past, like Ohio State. We went to Oklahoma and we won. Therefore, we're a college football playoff team. And that victory, we all know, earned Ohio State a slot as a non-conference champion. There aren't those games out there. Maybe Michigan, Notre Dame would be it.
Maybe, and you, like you said, Iowa State as well. I guess what does Alabama point to when they beat Duke in terms of their schedule?
They don't, but they unfortunately don't need to.
Well, maybe we should make them.
We should make them. You're absolutely right. But the SEC as a whole can say we have to play Texas, Miami, Notre Dame off the top
Texas,
of my head, Clemson twice.
Mm-hmm.
So
no, it's not a great schedule. It's not a great schedule, but as Kevin said, it is 9 games, And that's when the SEC says that we don't need to schedule non-conference games, even though you've mentioned some good ones. They're talking from an 8-game schedule. Ohio State, and sometimes that 9th game for Ohio State, that 9th game may have been the one that's kept them out the last 2 years. So there's some difficulty there, especially when you're playing somebody who's so familiar with you. But no, it's not a great slate. When Cincinnati is probably one of the best non-conference opponents, like you said, Iowa State. Who knows though? Iowa State might be 10-2 by the end of the season, and then it looks like maybe the best game on the schedule, because I think Notre Dame probably tops out at 10-2 with their schedule. We'll see. But I don't know why you necessarily need to latch on to a team. If Ohio State goes 12-1 this year and has a decent loss, an acceptable loss, then they're likely in based, unless something, in a normal situation, normal circumstances, they'd be in with that. They just haven't had that in a couple of years. So, when we talk about the Big Ten champs not making it, there are some, outlying situations there, big blowout losses where you haven't been, teams don't get in when they have those losses. So now I'm not super concerned or, latched on to the non-conference in terms of, what it means for an entire conference or, the strength of schedule, because, the Big Ten is getting their money, and I think they're fine with that. And that's unfortunate where they'll just keep cashing their checks and, protecting themselves. But that's what the SEC has done a lot, where the conference protects them with the way they schedule, in terms of they don't make the schedule too tough 2 weeks in a row, or, they just try to make things easier. The Big Ten hasn't been doing that so much for Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State, the teams with the best odds. But, I think you're dismissing the importance of Penn State and Pitt, frankly.
Is that what I'm doing?
Well, there's 7 ranked teams in the Big Ten. So maybe, you don't build your resume on playing outside the conference. Maybe I personally didn't put 7 ranked teams in the Big Ten. That's what the coaches and the media have deemed it to be. So if you play a schedule with 5 ranked teams or 6 ranked teams, and you win 4 or 5 of those games and you get to the end 12-1, I'd say you're pretty much legitimate. I mean, I don't know what else
Right.
you need to do.
I completely agree with Steve here, and what everyone is saying, what they're not saying is that it's only problematic. And Mark, I completely understand what you're saying, and it's difficult to evaluate these teams if you can't really tell who they're playing outside of their conference, if you don't really know. However, it's only problematic until it's time to vote. And, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face as talking heads, and fans can beat their chest about, their team has a better schedule or their conference has more parity. And it all ends up boiling down to the college football playoff. And we don't ever really know who's going to match up with who until they get on the field together. So we can pontificate all we want about who they might match up with and where. But if you're going to be a voter and you're looking at a Big Ten team that's a Big Ten champion, a Big Ten team that it might be a Big Ten champion with a 1 loss as opposed to 2 SEC teams, now that that's precedented. But I honestly don't think it's something that's going to matter until the rubber meets the road in November.
Well, I think you're right, Steve. It's not going to hurt the Big Ten as long as they hold serve. Notre Dame loss. Right. Would be forgivable for Michigan if they're not the team that's the playoff contender. If Ohio State's the playoff contender, as long as they don't have the bad loss that Tony points to, they're going to be forgiven for playing Cincinnati and that being their most difficult out-of-conference game, because the conference schedule is very difficult for Ohio State. Just the conference as a whole, if it comes down to a tiebreaker type situation with another league, can't point to many big games. Notre Dame, Iowa State, by Stanford. Those are the 3 best teams that the Big Ten is playing. And in Iowa and Northwestern's case, I don't know necessarily that they've got the right teams playing those teams, because they're not going to be the teams that are vying for a playoff spot.
Does the ACC get credit for playing Notre Dame in this? I don't think they should, because Notre Dame is pretty much just a conference opponent at this point.
An adjunct member.
No, but they'll get credit for Wake Forest, NC State, and I don't know,
Duke.
Columbia School of Broadcasting. I mean,
The sisters of the four.
So when you're talking about the conferences, I don't know that anybody else can. There's the SEC where they can talk about their out of conference this year, but what other conferences would be touting their ability to showcase their strength based on their non-conference?
Yeah, off the top of my head, let's see. In the ACC, they've got a game against Texas A&M and South Carolina and Florida and Boise State and Notre Dame 5 times.
league game.
League game.
Not a league game.
Pretty much a league game.
I'm a Big Ten guy through and through. I was just disappointed when I looked at the non-conference schedules in the Big Ten thinking, who is the Big Ten playing? Yes, if Michigan emerges over Ohio State and they can say, and it's a close toss-up situation between Michigan and somebody else, and they say, Notre Dame came in here and they finished 10-2 and we beat them, that's a good win. Again, the Big Ten's not going to suffer from this if there's a clear team to jump out, and it's most likely Ohio State, to say we're the best team in the league. Nobody's going to challenge that, most likely. But if it's more of a muddied situation against these other conferences, the Big Ten is not going to have those kind of games to point to, and they better not slip up and have Michigan State lose to Arizona State like they did last year, and not have Penn State lose to, because if they start racking up those kind of mid-tier, and I'm being kind, at mid-tier kind of losses, then it's really going to look ugly.
Well, I mean, if it gets muddy, we already know that it's going to be 2 teams in from the SEC because that genie's out of the bottle. It's going to be Clemson because they're head and shoulders above the rest of their conference, and they just don't necessarily have week in and week out challenges. I mean, they have a couple of good games on the schedule, and that's about it. And then it's going to be 3 conferences battling for the last spot. And as long as Ohio State holds serve, as you said, I mean, then things will work out. But if you trip up along the way, do you really deserve? I mean, you're gonna have to sweat it out and see if you deserve to be there. I mean, I don't think that a lot of people are all that concerned about the Pac-12. I mean, I've seen 5 different teams mentioned as potential conference champion there. Utah seems to be kind of a sexy pick, but I've seen everything from Arizona State to Washington to Oregon out there. And then, of course, in the Big 12, I mean, it really seems to be a 2-team race with Texas and Oklahoma, with Iowa State maybe being a half rung below them. But, just back to the Notre Dame point, part of the conference, part of the situation there, okay, they're not league games for the sake of being league games, but they have to play 3 games or 4 games automatically off the SEC or off the ACC schedule just based on what the agreement is. So
5?
You can't sit there and say that they're being brave and bold by playing Notre Dame. They have to play Notre Dame. It's part of the deal.
Well, let's just cut right to the chase. I'm looking at Oklahoma's schedule. Let's say Oklahoma, Oregon, Ohio State, and Clemson all end up 12-1. And for Clemson to lose a game is a major issue. I'm going to tell you what, if you're looking at a beauty contest and those 4 teams across there are 12-1, Ohio State head and shoulders is in, because Oklahoma's playing Houston, South Dakota, and UCLA. They potentially play 2 ranked teams, Iowa State and Texas. Clemson potentially plays 2 ranked teams, and one of them's already lost, Miami and Texas A&M. And maybe Syracuse in the championship game. Ohio State's going to potentially play 5 or 6. And I'm not even bringing up Oregon or Washington, because that's, their league's a little better. They've probably got 4 or 5 ranked teams this year, but nobody in the top 10. So come on, let's just cut right to the chase. If they're 12-1, a 12-1 Big Ten champion is way in. And there's no question about it.
Unless you lose by 40 along the way.
Yeah, as long as you don't lose by 40 to Purdue.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So here's the deal. If you like to throw a few bucks at the games, you can go to the link down in the description section below. You grab the link next to the hashtag #SamStrong. It's for a good cause. Believe me, I've mentioned this in a number of videos. There you go, Claire. point them in the right direction. And the graphic that's built right there that says 50% bonus, it's actually 100% bonus now, I understand. Our friends over at Volunteer Roadshow said that they've upped it at betnow.eu. They double your money. So you're already ahead of the game. You're ahead of the stick. So it's kind of a two-part plan. You put in the promo code MRTVCFB at that link. You sign up. You get 100% added to the account. So if you throw in $100, for example, you get 200 in the account. And then you go to the other link in the description section below. Claire, in the description section below. There it is. And the link that says Voice of College Football Community, and you get my picks. And then who knows how much money you can possibly make there. Or maybe I should quit while I'm ahead after I said Florida wins 26-20 over Miami. I got one in the books. All right. Do we have predictions for this one? Claire, we'll start with you. 100-0, right?
No way. Well, I said they would cover the spread, but we'll give Florida Atlantic a little bit, maybe with some misdirection, and if they have some garbage time. So we'll say 48-17. Does that still get them covering? I don't know.
Your math's in check. You're right. You're good. What do you think, Kevin? And if any of you, I certainly want to respect your sites. If you want to point people to your sites, if you got your predictions there, you can certainly pass and say, hey, go to the site. I've got my prediction there. But that's certainly well within the stipulations here, Kevin.
Well, we won't run our predictions till Friday, but I mean, I'm not that concerned about scooping myself. I think Ohio State's defense is going to do a lot of stuff that will make fans happy. I think that we'll see FAU run a couple of different quarterbacks out there. I mean, they've not announced a starting quarterback at this point. I expect it to be Robeson, but the offense will do enough. I don't think that we're going to see anything close to a 77-point outburst like we saw against Oregon State, but I like Ohio State winning comfortably 42-10.
What do you say, Tony?
Well, now I have to say 49-10 because I was also going with 42-10. But, Florida Atlantic, as Kevin said, hasn't decided on their quarterback, but we know it'll be Robinson, and he's experienced. They're trying to find new running backs. There's I think some of the receivers are banged up a little bit, so it's not like they're going to be firing on all cylinders. And I expect the defense to be pretty good for Ohio State. So earlier in the week, I was thinking 42-0, but it's hard to predict a shutout in the first game of the season when you don't know exactly what the opposing offense is going to bring. So I will have to one-up Kevin Noon, like kind of the opposite, or like a bid on the Price is Right. I will go $1 more, and I will say 49-10.
Shouldn't you say 43-10?
No.
One more touchdown, not one more point.
Yeah, and also, we'll have our staff picks Friday morning at theozone.net, so you can find my finalized pick there as well.
So you may consider that touchdown.
I can't do the same thing that Kevin Noon is doing. So no, I will not. 45-10, 42-0, 42-3, somewhere, but I can't go 42-10. Sorry.
Well, it gave me the idea. What's that, Kevin?
Few are qualified to copy me.
So it gave me the idea once we started to turn out these predictions that I'm going to keep track of these, and we'll come up with some kind of scoring system, and we'll see who wins this deal over the course of the season. How about that?
There you go.
Right.
What do you think,
on
Steve?
49-10.
49-10 is the official pick?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. You guys have taken all the good ones. I'll just go like 49-14, something like that. I know it's all right around in the same area. I mean, they could surprise us and get this thing up into the 50s. It's just I don't think you have that hot backup quarterback who's going to come in like a Tate Martell and throw for a couple more touchdowns at the end of the game. Maybe they do. I don't know. But again, with Fields, you just don't know what you're going to get. With the defense, you just don't know what you're going to get. With Florida Atlantic, you don't know what you're going to get. Is it the 10 or 11 win team from 2 years ago, or the 5-win team from last year, but I don't know. I'm not holding out a lot of hope for Lane Kiffin's guys. I'm saying 49-14 and Buckeyes out early and cruise to the win.
Well, despite taking a bit of a dip, I'm sorry, Kevin, I'm talking over you every time.
I'm just going to say this is a trap game for FAU because they have UCF next week.
Ooh, that's a biggie.
And for me, again, you got to go to the Voice of College Football community down there and grab the link. You guys are just going to have to trust me on my prediction, or you're going to have to subscribe to the Voice of College Football community to get my picks. But so I'll come back and I'll let you know what my prediction was. Maybe that'll be in the Twitter, and then I have to trust you guys to keep that under lock and key, because who knows? Once that gets out, then it's sure.
Or in 4 months, you'll just tell us that you went 15-0.
That's it. And yeah, there we go. So not a whole lot of suspense this week, but we'll keep tabs on the predictions here. Just another thing I need to keep track of. Sure, give myself something else to do. All right, everyone. Any last words before it's Lane Kiffin against the Buckeyes?
Here's to Rutgers University for releasing their beer and wine list, and they'll be serving White Claw at SHI Stadium or whatever. There are no laws with a claw.
GI Stadium.
We should probably also raise a glass in the direction of Jack Cohn, who's officially the starting quarterback at Wisconsin.
Hear, hear.
Yes. Congrats to him, and I look forward to watching him Friday against USF.
Friday, yeah.
7
that'll
p.m.
be
on
fun.
ESPN.
We'll be texting noon very, very often so that he doesn't miss any updates if he's not watching.
Oh, I'll be watching. I'll have my Graham Mertz pennant and everything. He'll be in by the third quarter.
How about this? This will be the third year in a row a transfer quarterback wins the Heisman.
Jalen Hurts?
No, Justin Fields, you idiot.
There's another prediction from Tony.
Can I book my trip to New York?
Yeah, go ahead. It's always fun there in December.
Yeah.
Claire, Steve, Kevin,
Yeah,
Tony.
I'll just throw in Scout Cincinnati tomorrow night. Luke Fickle's got a big one. And I heard from Jack Bark, the historian, yesterday that John Cooper and several of Luke's friends from Columbus are going down to provide some moral support tomorrow night as the Bearcats take on the Bruins, and they beat them at the Rose Bowl last year, I think by 9.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be Chip Kelly coming out to Cincinnati with the Bruins and trying to get their season off to a good start. Will the Bearcats be caught looking ahead to Ohio State? I doubt it. I think he'll have them ready to go, and we'll see if they can knock off the Bruins tomorrow night.
Yeah, Cincinnati was trailing in that game and dominated the second half, and they're like a 2.5-point favorite at home against UCLA and a much different UCLA squad under Chip Kelly, who's expected to do big things, and of course laid a 3-9 egg his first season. Tony, Claire, Steve, and Kevin, thanks for dropping by. You guys make this an exceptional show each and every week, and I am so glad that next week we will actually be talking about football that we actually watched on the field and then previewing the next game against Cincinnati. Everybody else on the live chat, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for the support, and we will see you soon. Of course, it's Ohio State Football Talk each and every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, so don't save this for yourself. Bring in your family, friends, and your social media acquaintances, and we will see you next Wednesday night.
Go Bucks.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.